The Questions Log, Week 17. I don't like to talk about this, but I've done my time in Limbo before. I had one team up with a blue beetle after I was just getting started, and then blank, until the crisis. Sometimes when I dream, or when I'm going deep inside, I can still see faces the world has long forgotten. I can see the face I abandoned there in the void. To know that blankness is to know that someday you'll be there again. For some, it's a door that swings two ways, but for most, the time to define our legacy is shorter than we think. So do we keep on living like we haven't glimpsed the face of God? Or do we devote our second chances to preparing for the day we run out of stories? Well, they don't call me the answer. This is 52 Pickup. Bite me, fanboy! This is 52 Pickup, a podcast about the greatest comic you've never heard of. I'm professional comic book expert Alex Jaffe.
And I'm Gita. I always am Gita, always will be Gita. Gita from the dawn of time until the end of time.
They are Gita eternal. Gita forever. Gita and Robin.
That's me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The dark Gita rises. The fire rises!
That's where we're at. 52, number 17, rounding down. This brings us 1/3 of the way through the series. This is the end of Act 1 of 3, as it were. Not that they plotted it that way, but that's where we're at. All of the character arcs are very clearly defined, except for the fact that they're going to throw a new one at us at the end of this issue, which we'll talk about when we get there. It's finally time, after fumfitting around it for all these months, to get into what's going on with these space heroes. Are you excited?
Yeah, like what is actually happening beat for beat with them? We just haven't known this entire time. Now we get some movement on this story, and it's just Grant Morrison stuff, guys.
Yeah, it's a Grant Morrison issue. Here we are.
Yep. Grant's back again.
Back on their bullshit. Before we get into that, I think we should talk talent. It's nobody new. Our old friend Chris Batista is back from 52 number 5, which was also a very Grant Morrison heavy issue. The superhero hospital one.
Oh, yes. And you can see some of the same formal qualities in their art here.
Again, it's the Lost in Space stuff. They also did the Clark Kent defenestration issue, a personal favorite, here on the pod. Series vets Rui Jose and Jack Jadson are back on inks. And our second chair colorist, David Barron, is on colors, taking over for Alex Sinclair. So it's all people familiar with 52 at this point. We're 17 issues in. Everyone knows what they're doing. But let's talk about this cover.
Oh my God. This cover is great. In that it's pure comic book, right? Like that's the thing I like about this. This is a cover that let's take a beat right here. We have to explain who the character Lobo is and why they exist.
Okay.
That's one thing we do have to get into to contextualize this whole issue. This is a Grant Morrison heavy issue, and as we have both discussed, Morrison is a writer that really likes piling context on context on context, so to create a very powerful image, but only if you know all of the contextual aspects that are at the margins of that image.
Right.
And this is part of that. They're doing it in like a silly way with the cover. You have to know who Lobo is to understand why this is a funny image.
It's great. We see Lobo, created by Keith Giffen, who is the breakdown artist for every issue of 52, is our focal character here as our space heroes finally escape the grasp of planet hell that they've been stuck on. What better place to start your cosmic journey than with Lobo, who Keith Giffen created as kind of a stock space biker character in his 80s Omega Men series. But then when Justice League International launched, he kind of built him into this sort of parody of Punisher and Wolverine and all the like big badasses that Marvel was toting around. Just kind of taking the piss out of the just like machismo comics aren't just for kids anymore type characters that started to populate comics.
Yeah. He's very Bam, Boof, Biff, you know what I mean? Like, he is very much, when I look at Lobo's design, I think of Spawn. And that isn't to say Spawn was a bad, not a good comic. Spawn is an iconic comic book figure for a reason. But you look at the character design for Spawn, and you're like, the 90s were fucking weird, y'all. He looks wild, it's got that acid green and the cape with the curly collar and all the raggedy edges and all of that. Those are all cool signifiers in the 90s, and now they look goofy.
He looks the way that Gene Simmons of Kiss looks in his head. Yes, that is the perfect explanation. Yeah. And Lobo is that guy, but not if he was trying to appear to be cool for children to get obsessed with him, but just he's that guy that thinks that stuff is cool. Right. Jaffe, have you seen The Curse? The Nathan Fielder. I've heard good things.
It's a fascinating show, but Benny Safdie is on that show. Jewish icon Benny Safdie is on that show, and he plays a character that is a reality TV show director type. And he said that part of the way he got into character for that was by buying a whole bunch of silver rings and turquoise jewelry and wearing it all of the time. And that's the kind of guy that Lobo is. Yeah.
Lobo is, fun fact, was often cited near the end of his life as Stan Lee's favorite DC character. Anytime someone asks Stan Lee who his favorite DC guy was, I love Lobo. He really captures the ridiculousness of what the comic industry became in the 90s into the 2000s.
So on the cover of this comic, Lobo is posing with Superman's cape, Wonder Woman's sword and lasso, and Batman's cowl. And he's speaking directly to the audience and saying, only 35 more to go. He also never says to, he always says ta.
Right, because he talks like a tough biker. I'll never forget the first time I even encountered Lobo. I imagine for you it might have been the Young Justice comics and Scans Daily. But for me, it was this 2-part episode of Superman the Animated Series, where he was voiced by Brad Garrett from Everybody Loves Raymond.
That's so funny. I mean, I think I might have seen some classic Lobo. Back in the day, my older brother, I've gone into his childhood bedroom. He was reading Batman comics in the floppies. So he has all these old issues of Batman and other DC comics. And I think when I was stealing his stuff, as the younger sister's right to do, I might have encountered some Lobo being written genuinely and non-ironically.
That makes sense.
At a certain point in time.
In the 90s, Alan Grant was writing both Lobo and Batman at the same time. So those collections would probably get intermingled.
I think that's probably where that intermingling occurred, where probably this was a time, this is such a shame, but at my local grocery store, they used to have a big rack of magazines and then also a small selection of comic books. So we would just get a comic book every time we bought groceries. And now that kind of thing just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's how I got into Superman.
Terrible. Yeah, those covers worked on me as a child. I feel like it's a real missed opportunity for Marvel and DC to not try to make those connections work anymore. There's a lot of places that don't have a good brick and mortar comic book store. Although an ex-boyfriend, we linked up recently. We just had a little chat. How are you in chat? And he said he needed office space downtown, so he decided to just start a comics and card shop. So
that's the dream.
Isn't that a great idea?
That is the number one thing I fantasize about if I ever win a lottery, to run a profit-losing comic book store.
Exactly. All he needs to rent this office, he was gonna rent the office space anyway. Yeah. So he might as well just put magic cards in there and water bottles, Perfect.
So back to this cover, that sort of totem he's leaning on of the Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman iconography is pulled straight from the cover of 52 #1. Where they're kind of posed like this sort of tombstone of all the heroes of 52 kind of paying their respect to these lost heroes. So Lobo's here to cast everything we've seen to this point in irreverence. And as Keith Giffen himself wrote in the notes for this, Lobo is not addressing the audience here, but taunting his creator directly. Because every single issue of 52, Keith Giffen is the one who's like, okay, we got 51 left. We got 50 left. This is going to kill me, but we'll get through it.
That's really, really funny.
Yeah.
He drew this drawing to himself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, J.G. Jones brought this to life. It's like my own creation is taunting me on the cover of this comic right now, which is a very Grant Morrison idea.
Absolutely. The sort of level of self-reference here feels very fitting for this particular issue. Man, I love comic books. I think they're good.
Morrison loves to make a comic feel haunted.
Yes. Well, yes.
But before that, we got to get through some Geoff Johns stuff.
Oh boy, I like the Geoff Johns stuff here in the beginning with the Everyman Project. Yeah. I like it because you can feel one of the other television influences that I think we've gotten better at describing the issues with, speaking of the curse, reality television really pulls through here.
Absolutely.
This was the era where American Idol was still a really big cultural landmark, as well as Survivor and stuff like that. And you can see in this segment, generally speaking, this segment is all about Lex Luthor coaching his little superhero team so they can know how to look good on TV, while we learn behind the scenes, of course, that their manicured personalities aren't exactly what they appear to be.
Yeah, one of them has sex, another one swears, and another one is literally a drug addict.
One of them said a homophobic slur.
And another one is implied to eat people. So
there you go. Like, things are not doing great. And then, I mean, we'll get into it in a second. And Lex also has a really weird, inappropriate relationship with Natasha, which also feels like it's straight out of reality TV.
That's a really good point. I was thinking about the weird John Byrne stuff back in the 80s where Lex Luthor is like, there's this kind of through line where he's kind of obsessed with underage girls that just has not aged very well.
Yeah. I mean, it might have aged perfectly.
Yeah,
in some ways.
Considering Byrne is on the record that Donald Trump was a direct influence for his reimagining of Luthor.
Okay, let me just pose this to you really quickly.
Yeah.
In real life, obviously, Lex Luthor would be in Epstein's little black book. But if there is a comic book equivalent of Epstein, who would that be?
The comic book equivalent of Jeffrey I think it might be Deathstroke, because Deathstroke kind of knows everybody, and he's definitely been up to some shit.
Yeah, he knows where all the bodies are buried.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I bet Amanda Waller could probably talk him into the idea that he should repopulate the Earth with his own progeny.
Absolutely, yeah. Dude is a heinous dad.
The worst dad ever. Actually, this does make sense to me. Deathstroke uses his assassination money to buy a little island somewhere where he invites women there to impregnate them, because he can't just ruin one child's life.
Yeah.
He's got to ruin a whole gaggle of them.
Yeah, the thing I love about Slade Wilson is that he's just the worst. He is not like an anti-hero. Just like the more you read about him, the more irredeemable and utter bag of shit he is. And Priest does a great job getting into that in his 2016 series, just like drawing blood. Like, no, he's not cool. He's pathetic.
That sort of less a sort of patheticness is what makes him the Epstein also, because Epstein's actual ideology is pathetic and stupid. Like, it's just the idea that he's the coolest guy in the world and that all in the future more people should be related to him. That's just bonkers. And anyone who believes that should die. That's all.
And you bring up the reality landscape of the 2000s, and Trump is a big part of that as well.
Yes.
He's the figurehead of The Apprentice. He has this whole image of being the smartest, savviest guy on TV, and that's exactly the role he is playing with the Everyman Project here.
Yes, I think that Lex as Trump is a very good angle for this. It works in the context that we're dealing with here before he became president, but then Lex Luthor also becomes president.
In 2000!
Comics sometimes are prophecy. That's crazy, but it's real. God, so going more closely beat for beat on these couple of pages, what we first see on the opening page is a video presentation about the Everyman team, right? It introduces all of their powers individually. They have a speedster, a guy who can morph into any form, a guy who's got the power of the sun, etc. Lots of generic flying brick type superhero power sets.
Yeah.
But stuff that also tries to be analogous to the Justice League, because that's the major competitor they have in this space, if I'm going to be talking like a marketer.
I think they're more analogous to like a new X-Men, kind of. That they're like these all same-age young compatriots who like are supposed to be super marketable and capturing the zeitgeist.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Pepsi and Coke here, where they're trying to position themselves as the Pepsi to the Justice League's Coke, where these people are younger and hotter and more relatable. And they're from, like the same cities that you're from. They mentioned that some of them are from Los Angeles, some of them are from Gotham. There's Metropolis's own Natasha, of course.
The Speedster is from Manchester, Alabama, the same place where the Impulse series takes place.
That's really funny.
Feels like a fun nod to Mark Waid's work there. I want to point out that they're fighting Cobra here, which a little bit of a history lesson. Cobra was created by DC in 1976, back when they had this idea to make villain-centric books. G.I. Joe would not introduce Cobra until 1982, so technically we had it first.
Suck it.
Yeah, kind of like how Karate Kid post-dates Karate Kid of the Legion of Superheroes. So get that straight.
God, have you heard the Karate Kid song with Jaden Smith and Justin Bieber?
Oh my God.
I heard that song for the first time in years yesterday. It's awful. It's very funny that they tried to do that. But moving on. I mean, again, the world of celebrity, which is like one of the major fascinations, like my own neurodivergent hyperfixation is all over this, especially as we transition from the television pre-shot presentation to what the team is actually like. Yeah. And they all fucking suck.
Yeah, basically. All of them are awful except Natasha.
Yeah, and Natasha doesn't say anything notably in this scene. She just gets fawned over by Lex. Yeah. Like in a way that is very fetishistic and gross. If they had a black writer on this team in any way, I'm sure they would have highlighted the racial element here too.
Oh yes.
But you see that in real life show up all the time. I mean, even with like non-white figures like P. Diddy and Cassie, everything that happened with there. Alex, if you're not aware, P. Diddy has fled the country because the FBI is coming for him because he has been sex trafficking and beating women.
Oh my God.
Including his ex-girlfriend I understand why you haven't caught up on this news.
He went Andrew Tate?
No, he went Andrew Tate, dog. He's not in America anymore. He is gone. He posted an apology video for a hotel's security footage was released of him beating his ex-girlfriend Cassie, who is a singer. It's a pretty brutal video. Trigger warning if you watch that. It is a very explicit video. It shows him hitting her and then dragging her by her hair. It's really painful to watch. But he posted an apology video conspicuously from a place that is definitely not America. There's palm trees in the background and like bamboo slats. He is not in the USA. He is from a place that does not have extradition laws right now. He's off the grid. But young black women are especially vulnerable to this stuff because like Natasha, she wants to be recognized so badly because she is working really, really hard. So that makes her vulnerable to predators who want to feed her ego and then take everything from her.
I want to point out Natasha calling out the awful purple and green costumes they designed for these everyman heroes, which Giffen designed and immediately regretted. So like, we gotta get these off and figure something else out. So that's kind of what's happening there.
That's very funny. Yeah, one of the heroes says that they look like fruits, which is an old-timey, like, now it feels like the most PG possible thing they could have said in the age of libs against TikTok. But,
yeah.
But you get the sense that, these people don't actually like each other. They don't have natural chemistry. They don't want to be in the same room with each other. And the speedster is repeatedly stabbing herself with a device that she says helps her with the fact that her powers are always on. And she feels like that Lex Luthor has kind of ruined her life.
It's the slowdown drug from Dread 2012.
Oh, yes it is.
Yeah.
Yes it is. Yeah, she is super mad, and then she almost starts a fight and runs out. But Lex is okay with losing her, though.
Sure.
Lex doesn't give a shit. Lex just wants to make sure they'll all be on television tomorrow.
Exactly.
And that he can get a return on his investment.
Yeah, she'll be back.
She'll be back.
They always come back. They never say no to daddy.
Oh, gross. Get out of here.
And he ends the scene by talking to Hannibal Bates, the shapeshifter. A very Jeff Johns name.
That's I wonder what that guy's like.
Yeah. Now then, Hannibal, about your diet.
Yeah. What's your relationship with your mother like? I'm very curious.
Yeah. Don't let him near the showers. Here we are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Day 2. This is the meat of the story we're in now. We've got the asteroid field scene from Empire Strikes Back, but with superheroes, which they call out directly.
Yes. Starfire, Animal Man, and Tom Strange.
Adam Strange.
Adam Strange. His name is Adam.
Right.
Everyone's named Tom in comic books, so I just default to that. That's not true, but it's something to say. They are trying to get through an asteroid field with Corey just blasting asteroids so that the blind pilot here doesn't fly into them. Feels like they could have done something differently here. Not sure what, but they are having a bad time.
I don't know. Corey's used to carrying the team. That's kind of what she did all those years on the Titans.
It's kind of funny when you look at the power lineup of the characters on the Titans, and it's like a bunch of people who are like just good at martial arts, and Coriander!
Yeah, and then Superman, if he could do Kamehamehas, is a member of the team.
Yeah, exactly. Superman with big naturals doing Kamehamehas. It's really funny.
Oh my god! Yeah, Starfire is OP as hell, and I love her for it.
Absolutely.
What a legend.
I love that this is a great issue for her characterization-wise. I think she's written perfectly in this issue. It's what I want to see, right? She's written like someone who knows her worth, and I love that. But they are noting that this strategy of having a blind man pilot a spaceship through an asteroid field is not going well for them.
No.
And they are also, Animal Man is in particular pretty distraught. The scene fast forwards from day 2 to day 4, implying that they've just been in this asteroid field for multiple days, unable to escape it. And it's at this moment where they begin to have some heart-to-hearts and some more Grant Morrison type stuff starts occurring.
I like the Adam Strange note, which is very Alan Moore Swamp Thing. The Adam Strange issues there. But the fact that Adam kind of exists in this Zeta Beam existence where he doesn't have to deal with relationships because he's always teleporting out of them.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that I like about Grant Morrison comics, is that they think about the impact that these kinds of situations would have on your everyday life. Like, Adam is like, I prefer long-distance relationships because as soon as shit gets wild, I'm just gone.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I can relate.
I get it. I do get it. It is like, as soon as you get sick of being in a relationship where you live with a person all the time is hard fucking work.
I bet.
Adam just doesn't have to do it. But that evening, when Adam Strange has gone to sleep, Corey notices Animal Man up that night looking at a picture of his family. And they have a really nice conversation.
I think this is the moment that people have been waiting for since Animal Man showed up in this comic. Like, the idea of Grant Morrison returning to Animal Man, which is the duo that basically launched the concept of Vertigo Comics. Just the idea of Grant revisiting this relationship after literally writing the book on this one C-string superhero guy going through the ringer of just the absolute most high concept situations that a comic book could conjure in the late 80s. And just like, well, what's Animal Man up to now? And the idea is like, yeah, I've kind of been ignoring it, but all this time, like, I've been carrying that with me and trying to pretend it doesn't matter. And like, there's this great panel where, like, while he's talking to Corey, he glances out the window, but you can see he's clearly looking directly at us. And like, in that like one quiet moment, you can see, yeah, he's known we were here the entire time. He's just pretending not to see us now.
Yeah, it's when he's saying the phrase, it all runs to a plan.
Yes.
And that's that moment, that's that spark that people feel with Morrison's work, I think, where, again, they create an image that depends on a lot of context, but if you know all that context, it's so special. And you know, there's a moment in Animal Man, if we've read it, where there is a moment where Animal Man looks at us and talks to us and actually reaches out their hand to us. And it's a little echo back towards that. But then Morrison also introduces a counterfactual in Corey and what Corey says here, where Corey is like, that sounds like crazy and metaphysical and existential, but I've also been traveling in space for a really long time. And here's what I need in order to understand and grapple with how massive the universe is. There's nothing so big in the universe that you can't fit it inside your own head. Like, your own imagination is as massive as the cosmos. So you don't have to bear this alone. Is like a big thing here. That's maybe one of the only things that you can get out of the Space Hero arc in the long run, but that the thing that's being sort of complicated is this idea that the existential experience only ever happened to one hero, and it's Animal Man. It's like, no, all of these characters have to deal with questions about the creation of the universe and the plan that it runs by, because they are in a fictional universe that's deliberately created.
In every crisis at the climax, we see these literal hands that shape the universe that Buddy specifically calls out. And Corey's like, yeah, I know, we've all seen The Time Knife. Get over it.
I like that because it is still, it doesn't take away from what Buddy went through.
Yeah.
But it adds like the whole thing about Buddy's like sort of sad suburban life was that he felt really isolated from other parents his age because his family is so fucking weird. Mm-hmm. But now he is reaching a point that I think a lot of adults reach where it's like, actually, a lot of people had a fucked up experience and maybe I could talk about it more. And probably I'd normalize the fucked up things that happened to me. And here he is learning that, yes, he is not the only comic book character that's realized they were in a comic book.
Yeah, this is also kind of the start of a friendship between Animal Man and Starfire that will continue for the next few years in comics after 52, which is kind of cool.
I think they're a pretty natural fit for friends because, again, Corey is just completely self-assured and very confident, and she's seen a lot. So Animal Man sort of also similarly quiet confidence. He doesn't have any ego about being like third string. He doesn't care about that. His family is much more important to him.
Right.
And similarly, I think Starfire has also just been depicted as a character that has a very emotional, intense relationship to her family that's not always positive, but still is really important to her. So she understands how much it means to Buddy that he's not with his family right now.
Right. Like, they see all this cosmic stuff with implications about the nature of reality itself, but at the end of the day, all of that pales to the fact that my wife is at home waiting for me, and she's still hanging up laundry, and I gotta get back to it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's sort of like if you were like hanging out with Beyonce and you're like, man, I miss my husband. And she was like, me too.
It literally is. I get
it. Oh, man. But this quiet moment is interrupted. Yeah. It's a very good pause. But then at one point, I think Buddy had said in a previous page that he thinks that someone's been throwing the meteors at them. Yeah. And they realize, in fact, that is true.
It's Devil Lance! Devil Lance the Pursuer, who has gotten more screen time at this point than he ever did in Jack Kirby's New God Saga. Like, now, just like with Black Adam, 52 is the primary text for this throwaway New God character now. Just ripping through this spaceship like he's the giant space worm in Empire Strikes Back.
It's a cute little sequence, right? Yeah. Where they can't do anything except watch as Devil Lance the Pursuer destroys their engine and rips apart the space worm. But then suddenly everything stops and they look outside and there's a different character standing over the corpse of Devil Lance. Yeah. And that's fucking Lobo.
An unexpected challenger arrives who literally just tunnels through his entrails and just arrives in this big one-page splash hero shot of Lobo smoking a cigar, holding up a machine gun, literally in the vacuum of space, something they call out in the next scene, which is very funny to me. It's like, yeah, Lobo can smoke in the vacuum of space. That's just what Lobo does. Yeah, the smoke goes up. Created a vacuum
seal around his cigar only. Yes, and the smoke goes up. Fuck you. It's so too bad, like, that they tapped Jason Momoa for Aquaman, even though that's a perfect casting, because Jason Momoa would also be a perfect Lobo.
Momoa was born to play Lobo. I would be very surprised if Momoa hasn't spoken to James Gunn already about being Lobo in the new DC universe.
Like, I can just be a cameo. That's the best way for Lobo to appear. Yeah. Like, we don't have to do a whole big movie for me or anything. I got my movies in. I'm in fucking Dune. It's just the same character as Duncan Idaho.
Yeah. You know? It's like, come to think of it, Morrison is kind of the one who plays a lot with the fact that there's this field around Superman that allows him to do stuff in space. And it's kind of like Lobo is doing the same thing here, but just using it completely frivolously. which is very much in character for him.
Yeah.
He's got a little cowboy hat mounted on his space motorcycle.
It's so funny. It's so all of the imagery is hilarious. He looks like he's a member of Adam Ant's band, I just love when Lobo shows up. I sincerely do. I have a fondness for Lobo that might be a little bit surprising, but unless you've also read Young Justice, and then you would know why I love Lobo. In Young Justice, Lobo showed up, they had a little misadventure, but then a little bit of Lobo budded off, and it was a young Lobo, and they called him Slowbo because he was going to grow up slower than everybody else.
Right.
And I love Slowbo. It's like if you took the adult character of Lobo and then made them an emotional teenager, which is just kind of my bread and butter for me. It's he had to go through all of the existential emotional crises that teenagers do, but also he was fucking Lobo, so he was talking like that the whole time.
Right. What's really interesting to me about that in particular is that Peter David kind of has the same problem with Lobo as Grant Morrison does with Lobo, where everyone had been hounding Keith Giffen to include Lobo in this series from when it was announced because he's overseeing the whole thing. And Keith is like, Grant, why don't you put Lobo in this cosmic story? And Grant is like, the thing is, I don't really like Lobo. He's not an interesting character to me. And Keith said, well, then make him interesting. And as we'll see, Grant Morrison subverts everything we know about Lobo by putting him on the most unlikely path possible for the character, which is the same thing that Peter David does. How do I do something with Lobo? I'll make him a kid, and we'll examine what Kid Lobo is.
Exactly. Lobo is playing Lobo straight is not interesting.
No.
The first couple times you see it, you're like, I get it. I don't need more of that. Taking a character like Lobo that is designed to encapsulate a mode of comic book writing and artistry that is not as popular as it was anymore, and then adding more or removing some of the 90s edginess, that becomes more naturally more compelling. Because it's about a lot of the things that Grant Morrison does in their work, about looking back at the way that we used to tell stories and how they've changed over time.
I got to meet Keith Giffen in 2017, 2018 at a Comic-Con in Florida. And we talked about Lobo a little bit along with a lot of other stuff. And he's like, the thing about Lobo is that I kind of hate him now because he started as this very much joke character. And it feels like the more Lobo gets written, the more the joke gets lost. That they're just trying to make him into this sleek, sexy, awesome badass, which was the very thing I was trying to make fun of. But we'll get into the fact, we'll get into the point that Lobo got away from Keith Giffen a little later, because it is an interesting story.
It is. But we're in the middle of telling an interesting story.
Here we have one of my least favorite Grant Morrison traits, which we're going to have to address here.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. The thing about Grant Morrison is that when Grant Morrison needs to write a comedy scene, they kind of approach it with the aplomb of a nose-bleeding, pervy old man character from a 90s anime.
That's true. It is Master Roshi.
Yes.
Every single time.
It's what is Grant Morrison's Plastic Man but Master Roshi?
Absolutely. So, yes, Corey's the only one that can navigate the vacuum of space. So she is dressed like Megan Thee Stallion, and she goes out there.
Good casting,
and
by the way.
Lobo just makes some leering gestures and looks, and she's disgusted. Literally doing the honking gesture at her breasts. And it's just
he literally pulls her costume off of her.
Oh my God. Gross. Just gross.
Check that third panel into the silent page. You see that?
Yeah, I forgot that he literally pulls it off. It's so gross. Grant, come on!
Come on! So it's a funny gimmick, the fact that we can't hear what they're saying because they're in space, but they're talking to each other. And Corey makes the universal "I'll pay you cash" gesture at him. And that's how you get Lobo on your side, by paying him more than what he's been paid to hunt you.
She's a shrewd negotiator, I'll say that. She was going to be the queen of her people. She understands how real politics.
That's her training.
So Absolutely. She's perfect, and I think she should be in everything. Absolutely. It's really bringing me back how much I love Coriander reading this book, I have to say. I just think she's super fun. It's a kind of character I hope James Gunn has plans for her in a filmic sense. Even you don't even have to do Teen Titans because so many things happen to her outside of the Teen Titans, although that's the bulk of where her characterization comes from. It really
bums me out that Corey has never really had a solo comic series. She had one back in 2015 that ran for 12 issues, but it was kind of more of a sex comedy farce set in Florida, which is not what you need from her.
You need her, just imagine, literally, Megan Thee Stallion having to do, political negotiations, and when they fall apart, doing Kamehamehas at people.
Yeah, that's Princess Leia Thee Stallion. That's who...
Princess Leia Thee Stallion! Exactly!
That's who she is.
Walk softly and carry a big blaster. That's what it's all about.
I love it. Oh, man. They get out of this Devilance the Pursuer trap. They offer to pay Lobo from the Tamaranian family fortune to help them get out of space, but apparently they're exchanging favors because Lobo needs their help. He's joined the church and turned his back on violence. So kind of the last reveal of this sequence is that Lobo has found God, which is the last thing you would expect.
Yeah. I do like that little twist that he's found God and is no longer a murder machine. That is a good way to complicate the character, is give him something that he cares about more than being a big badass, which is always fun. That's what made Lobo so fun, because when you're a 13-year-old version of Lobo, you can't just be the baddest motherfucker because you have to say motherfricker.
Yeah.
So you have to, then that character has to do introspection. And characters that don't do introspection, doing introspection for the first time is always a very fun hook for me as a reader.
So at the end of this week, we get to day 7, and we get this cliffhanger plot of Red Tornado, who we last saw with his voice box trapped in Mal Duncan back in the hospital issue. Just kind of repeating 52 over and over in the Australian outback. So it's just trying to remind us that there's this overarching mystery of what does this number mean, because it's been a while since we addressed that. And that's where it ends.
That's the comic.
That's the comic, with one exception. Keith Giffen taken out of pencil retirement because editor Stephen Wacker wants him to do the Origin of Lobo 2-page backup. Who better than the creator of Lobo to do the Origin of Lobo 2-pager this issue?
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good. I especially love the layout here because it gives a lot of room for the art, and it lets the jokes of Lobo's origin just kind of lay on the page, right? You get this one big long panel on one side of the page and then 4 square panels on the other side of the page. It's arranged vertically as opposed to horizontally. And that means you get to look at this big picture of Lobo. Well, then you look at little baby Lobo with his little baby toes.
Yeah. I also want to point out the Hories are the colorists, the husband and wife team of Richard and Tanya Horry, whose color work kind of helped define the look of Image Comics when they were first launching. So, of course, you get the Image colorists to work on the Lobo backup.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It knows exactly the tone it's supposed to strike, and it's just a lot of fun.
Oh, it's beautiful.
What Lobo has turned into post-90s is both making fun of that kind of comic book badass type and also an homage to it.
Right.
The use of the phrase bastich.
You got to frag a bastich.
Exactly. It was a way to get around not wanting to put censorship in fuck a bastard.
Yeah. Some of my favorite Lobo gags are often repeated by Giffen work is that Lobo is Czarnian for he who devours your entrails and thoroughly enjoys it.
I love that joke too. That's
the fact that he destroyed his entire race for a science project in middle school and gave himself an A. These are the standard Lobo jokes.
Yeah.
He's the best. He's designed to be the best he is at the best he does at what there is. The best there is at what he does.
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean. He got his ass kicked by Wolverine in the Marvel vs. DC crossover in the 90s because that's how the fans voted. I always felt mad about that.
I feel like that has to be a draw, though. Like, they're absolutely equally matched. Like, come on.
And, like, Mark Waid is not a guy who usually does toilet humor, but I do want to give him accolades for rising to the call at this point, because he ends this on just an incredibly good Lobo bit, where he says, "To learn that Lobo is after you is to know the sudden experience of spontaneous defecation. Enjoy it. It will be your last moment of warmth in this lifetime."
That's a really good poop joke, I have to say.
Yeah.
It's a very erudite poop joke, which I think is the tone that they're trying to strike here.
Absolutely.
And I love that they also mention Lobo's fondness for space dolphins. And he's inexplicably protective of them, which I always think is very acute, like, character tick that they give him. I love Lobo. I mean, he's horrible, but I love Lobo.
Lobo's the worst, but I love him. A problematic fave, to be sure. But yeah, Lobo blew up because Giffen brought him back from obscurity to be a foil to Guy Gardner in Justice League International, and everybody loved this asshole.
Yeah.
So DC begged him to create his own, and we're getting into Blackboard territory here, but might as well. DC kind of begged Keith to do his own Lobo spinoff with Alan Grant, and Keith said, "I'll do it on one condition: you can't censor me. I want to get as wild and weird with Lobo as possible." And they're like, "Okay, go ahead." And the first 3 issues were just one more insane than the next. And then finally, in season 4, he sends Lobo to the afterlife and writes the scene where Lobo literally interacts with the actual Jesus Christ. And DC's like, "You can't do that." And he's like, "Fine, then I'm gone." And that's why from then on, Alan Grant is the guy who writes Lobo, because Keith Giffen's like,
so
"I don't want to do it.
If you can't let me meet literally Jesus Christ, I'm leaving."
It's the funniest fight, like, maybe in the history of DC Comics. But because of that,
hilarious.
We get all these kind of winking references to Lobo and religion. Like, the fact that Lobo is immortal because he's been rejected from both heaven and hell. So he always just comes back.
That's really funny.
Yeah, so the fact that he's become like this space pope in this story arc in 52 is kind of a winky callback to the original fight over Lobo that Keith had with DC editorial.
It just makes me happy.
It's so good.
It's very silly. This is what comics. I was about to say. This is pure comic book to me. Yeah. This is about a weird grudge playing out on the page that produces an excellent story, but also is like was like for the creators like walking uphill in mud. You know,
this is what it's all about, man. What was your favorite scene in this issue?
My favorite scene is the one where Animal Man is monologuing about meeting the big time hands and looks at the reader.
Yeah.
That's my favorite by far. I like this Buddy Baker moment because it does the end of Animal Man. It doesn't give you the catharsis you need, and you never learn what Buddy feels about it. You just see his relief at seeing his family again because he thought he lost them forever.
No, most of the last issue of Animal Man is just Grant Morrison speaking directly to the reader and acknowledging their editors. That's the whole thing. It's like credits rolling over a fight scene.
Exactly. You learn a lot about Grant Morrison's childhood friend or childhood imaginary friend.
Yes.
But you don't really get the emotional catharsis for what Buddy has gone through. And that's like the point. I get it. But as a person invested in the character, I finally get a cap on the end of that. And it's like, Buddy acknowledges that it changes his whole life. But then he also meets another character that is like, but it doesn't have to take away from who you are.
Right.
It's very nice. And it's also great coriander writing, I thought. I just think it's a good scene.
You're absolutely right. It's I've seen Corey written well. I've seen Corey written poorly. And this, Grant absolutely got what Marv Wolfman and George Perez were putting down back in that 80s Teen Titans run here. It's so good. This is the kind of Corey I really want to see more of. Obviously, that was my favorite scene too. It's the emotional core of it. Eagle-eared listeners know that I'm not necessarily the biggest Grant Morrison fan on the podcast, but like, this is the shit they get right. This is absolutely...
I'm the biggest Grant Morrison fan on the podcast, but I agree that the combination of the metatextual stuff with the really human writing is when I like them most. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a little moment in Batman and Robin when Dick Grayson is Batman and Damian's Robin, where Bruce Wayne is coming back, and Damian just expresses that he wishes that it could be Dick and him together as Batman and Robin forever.
Yeah.
And there's like, oh, you actually do understand what it's like to be a 12-year-old boy, to have a male mentor. And
right.
you did write that with the intention of creating this relationship with characters. And it's like, oh, you get people. I like that.
Yeah, Damian was a very personal character to Grant. Grant talked about how they wrote themselves as Damian and Batman and Talia as their feuding parents. Which I think has done a little bit of a disservice to both the characters of Batman and Talia, and says a lot to you about what Grant Morrison thinks of themselves based on what Damian thinks about themselves.
I think it's a very funny way to acknowledge your own egoism,
yeah,
I would say. You
yeah.
write yourself as a petulant little 12-year-old that thinks that nobody's better than them.
Yeah, that's fair as well. I know a lot of people who think Damian Wayne is annoying, and it's kind of like, that's the point, dude.
Yeah, he's 12. Who's not annoying when they're 12?
Right.
Come on.
All right. Do you have anything to put on the Blackboard this week?
The Blackboard, for me, I'm genuinely interested in who else has seen the time hands and been like, you know what, whatever. You know? Can I just get a list of everybody who's seen those time hands and then hasn't had it been like a profound moment of existential change?
I know Superman has for sure. That's kind of what Final Crisis is about.
Yeah.
Ambush Bug is very aware of his fictional nature. Harley Quinn in places, but she never really takes it seriously. Because you can't. I think Animal Man is the only one who kind of has to reckon with the fact that the universe is kind of this. The other one is even long before Grant Morrison, Psycho Pirate in Crisis on Infinite Earths, who is like cursed with that knowledge.
And Psycho Pirate specifically comes back in Animal Man,
right?
Because Grant Morrison wanted to tie in this idea of being the only one that knows the secret history of the universe into that book. That's a great issue of Animal Man too.
It really is, yeah. I have a cool story about that issue, where there's this moment in that issue where Psycho Pirate is summoning these ghosts of all these forgotten characters who have been erased from continuity. And there's this one character that is just amongst his whole crowd in this stock scene of like a lady in Adam Strange style armor riding a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And just like all of Twitter at one point lost their minds. Like, who is this character? I don't recognize them. So because I am who I am, I literally went through every Silver Age Strange Adventures, every Mystery in Space, trying to look for anyone who resembled this. I went through hundreds and hundreds of issues. I eventually was able to track down the artist Chaz Truog on Facebook. And I reactivated my old Facebook account to reach out to him to ask him, hey, do you remember what was going on with this character? And he's like, yeah, Grant told me to just go nuts and invent some guys in the background. And I really like dinosaurs. And I was like, that checks out, Chaz Truog.
That fucking rules.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
Yeah. So that's that character's secret origin. You want to go to the mailbag?
I do. Let's see what's in that mailbag.
All right. It's time to ask the questions. This is the point where we get questions submitted to us at 52mailbag@gmail.com and address whatever you want to know about comics or culture or just want to shout at us from the rooftops. Our first question comes from Bridget, who says, longtime listener, first-time caller. I love the concept of Molly's and Gita's questions about the LGBT nightclub scene in Gotham. I'm wondering if you've seen The People's Joker yet, and how close you think it matches up to what the real queer scene in Gotham would be. P.S. I'm a subscriber, and will happily pay to listen to a whole episode on The People's Joker.
This is the continuation of Alex Jaffe trying to peer pressure me into doing a bonus episode on The People's Joker. And listen, now that I know that they're doing a physical media release, I just have to do it, right? I just haven't had the time. We have to do it. I haven't seen it yet. I hadn't had the time when it was in theaters for New York for like a millisecond to see it, but I have to see it because I'm also it's been such a struggle for Vera Drew to get this particular movie in front of people's eyes. When they premiered this movie at TIFF, right before the first screening of it, they got a cease and desist from Warner Brothers. Mm-hmm. But it seems like things have eased up and they've accepted that this is a fair use. Yeah. So that feels like it has to be a James Gunn decision also.
Yeah.
If you look at his particular and specific background with guerrilla filmmaking, that has to be James Gunn being like, come on, this doesn't hurt our bottom line at all.
James just going, let him play, coach. Let him play.
Exactly. I wouldn't be surprised if they got like a weird email from James Gunn one day that was just like, hey, I'm sorry. Yeah. That was a lawyer decision back then, not me. I wasn't in charge yet, so don't worry about it.
Knowing how extremely online James Gunn is, I do not doubt it.
Absolutely. Vera Drew's also one of the people that has worked with Tim Heidecker on Cinema at the Cinema. So this is like an offshoot of another thing I love and obsessed with, which is this is a really weird parody movie review show that has a really expansive lore universe that I probably would be doing a podcast on if I was not doing a podcast on 52.
And, it also ties into a lot of comedy Bang Bang stuff, which also has its own expansive lore.
You see how this is a fertile ground for a bonus episode, right?
We'll get it to you. We just recorded a whole damn episode about The Flash.
And please listen to it because we talked about it for so long. We didn't like it. we didn't like it at all.
We were trapped in the Chrono Bowl for so long.
Oh my God, it's so ugly.
I became an Ezra Miller old man at the end of that. Oh, man.
You just talk like this. That's what they sound like. That's what they sound like when they're doing the old man voice.
Here I am in the Chrono Bowl. Oh, look, there's Nicolas Cage as Superman. I guess I'll let my mother die now. You'll have to listen to the episode for more.
Please do listen to that episode, please. Just validate all the time I spent on that piece of garbage. God. Holy shit.
All right. Our next question comes from Cece, who asks, I've always been curious about Flash Gordon. I saw the 1980 movie back when it used to air on G4 TV, but never knew where to start with the comics. Any recommendations? What do you know about Flash Gordon, Gita?
I know that Queen theme song fucking rocks. That's what I really know about Flash Gordon. Flash, savior of the universe. That's so good.
Yeah. Brian Blessed is in it as Hawkman, unrelated to DC's Hawkman.
That's very funny. The image I initially had was incredibly funny.
Yeah. He does kind of look like DC's Hawkman.
That's really hilarious.
But yeah, Flash Gordon is the story of an all-American football star who gets sent to space and has to fight a very Asian-coded supervillain from taking over the Earth. But if you're interested in Flash Gordon, he's always not really been a comic book character, but a comic strip character, kind of like Mark Trail or Buck Rogers back in the 1930s. You can find some good, if you want to go back to like the real original source material, you can find some good hardbound copies that collect those original strips. But if you're specifically interested in the 80s Flash Gordon movie, what you want to do is watch the movie serial starring Buster Crabbe. Buster Crabbe was like the Tom Cruise of his day, the biggest action star of the 1930s. He was Tarzan. I think he was in the running to play Superman at one point. He was the main guy, and he did 3 film serials. 1936 is Flash Gordon, Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars in 1938, and Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe in 1940. And these are the serials which not only inspired the Flash Gordon movie, but also inspired George Lucas to create Star Wars. So if you really want to get into the meat of Flash Gordon, that's where you want to go.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah.
Man, I love the lineage of Star Wars so much more than I actually like Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
We'll have to have this conversation in a little bit. But I started watching The Acolyte, and it's not bad so far.
I like The Acolyte a lot.
One, they're paying Carrie-Anne Moss.
Yes.
If you pay Carrie-Anne Moss, I am a fan of you.
Yes.
2, not just one Amanda Sternberg. 2 of them.
2 Amanda Sternberg.
I love
this
her.
is getting out of hand. Now there are 2 of them.
Exactly. And it seems to get into the intra-politics of the Jedi that I actually enjoy, which is that the laws of the Order are actually really, really hard to follow.
Right.
And they're kind of unfair. That's the stuff I like about Star Wars.
Me too. I love when they get into the messy complexity of the Jedi Order.
Yes.
I was gonna do a Star Wars podcast, but decided to do this instead. So we're going to have to save that for another point, and I probably won't do it with Gita because they would lose their mind.
No, I would not be able to do it because I would be like, I'm bored.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, like I don't know. I don't know if Gita would rather start a Star Wars podcast or a Doctor Who podcast, but it's kind of a race to the bottom.
That's like kind of both of them are my vision of hell. I'm not going to lie to you.
I'm not going to put you through that.
Oh my God. I would listen to your Star Wars podcast, so when you do it, I'll happily be a fan.
Tell you what, I'm going to take Gita on my Star Wars podcast if Aftermath reaches let's say $100,000 a month. How about that?
That would be so sick. We will add that to our milestone, our subscriber milestone thing.
That's where we go through every piece of Star Wars media in chronological order, including the books and the comics.
That would be interesting, but I would become really bored very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. There's a bunch of real, like, snooze fest shit all grouped together like 200 years before the Phantom Menace.
Jesus Christ.
You're not going to have a good time.
No, I wouldn't have a good time.
But we didn't have a good time watching The Flash either, but we put ourselves through that pain in service of you, the people. Our next question is from Brandon F., who asks, Alex, I've been trying to get into some more of the Golden Age stuff lately, but after reading The Spirit, I've been pretty hesitant to go further. The Spirit has a really racist blackface sidekick in a lot of his early adventures, which is probably what Brandon's talking about. Any recommendations or warnings? I've been wanting to check out Jack Cole's Plastic Man. I'll say your instincts are good. Jack Cole's Plastic Man rules. It's some of the best Golden Age stuff that really holds up because Jack Cole was one of those rare writer-artists of his age that was really able to take advantage of the medium while developing this character. And it does some really interesting stuff visually and holds up very well. I think the first year of Superman stories before, like, the concept of supervillains is even developed are really, really interesting, where he's just this literal champion of the working class, just going against corrupt CEOs and war profiteers and just rubbing their noses in the mess of society they created, just very much a populist socialist champion that Grant Morrison tried to tap into in their own 2011 run on Action Comics, if you want more of that. But it's right there on the page in 1938, because before World War II, every creative person in America was a socialist. And then they had to get on board with hating Russia, and that's how McCarthyism started.
That's essentially, I don't think you really missed anything either.
Yeah.
You know, like, everyone who read books was a socialist for a while.
Right.
And then the Red Scare started, and things got serious.
Early Wonder Woman stories are bad, but interesting. Early Fawcett Comics, Captain Marvel adventures are great, but both of them also have troubling depictions of black people. There's early sidekick in the 1942 to 1945 Captain Marvel stories named Steamboat, who was so problematic that, like, one of the first letter writing campaigns in comic book history were by black readers who were like, this is bullshit, get this guy out of here. And
wow,
to their credit,
that's
they did.
Really funny. Like, at the time, people were like, hey, this is super racist.
Yeah. It's not like it was a different time. In 1942, the people reading is like, this is insane.
Like, you gotta stop.
Yeah.
This is unacceptable. That's really funny.
But they did, and he never came back. But if you're reading the Golden Age Captain Marvels, which are otherwise great, you're gonna encounter that. Same with The Spirit. The Spirit's great, but you got that weird racist sidekick.
It's just like with a lot of media from before the current age, you are just going to run into stuff that's really unfortunate, like just remnants of different modes of power thinking differently about people's roles in society, I'll say generously. But it's like racist shit, sexist shit, homophobic shit. You'll just encounter it, and it's just a bitter pill you have to swallow, unfortunately. It's easier when you are forewarned, I will say. Like a lot of really gross stuff about women in like French New Wave movies, as long as I know that like French directors at that time were all really sexist, I feel a little bit easier engaging with those topics because I know the kind of minds that produce.
Right. This is why trigger warnings exist. It's not necessarily to keep you from reading it. It's to mentally prepare you.
Exactly.
Which is really important.
Yeah, it just makes it easier because if I run into racist stuff by accident, I feel like shit for a whole day.
Yeah.
If I'm deliberately engaging with something that I know has a racist element to it, then I can brace myself for it. And I can actually give the work better, the sort of consideration it deserves because I'm not just having an emotional reaction to the racism.
Right. Because when the warning comes ahead of time, you know there's an intentionality to it as opposed to kind of a casualness to like just like an offhand, oh, this is acceptable. If you know beforehand that this is part of the work or it's contextualized for you as an exception to what makes the work good, it helps you mentally adjust. Our last two questions are for you. This one also comes from Brandon, who says, Gita, since Alex has bullied me into getting the Question Omnibus Volume 1, which I bully everyone to do. Do you have a favorite comic that you would like me to read or wish more people would read? It doesn't matter who published it.
Okay, if it doesn't matter who published it, then it's 20th Century Boys.
Okay.
20th Century Boys, the manga by Naoki Ohara. Also the writer of Monster, which famously Guillermo del Toro tried to get the rights for to produce into a movie and was like, Warner Brothers had the rights for a long time for an HBO series. It's a really good meditation on nostalgia and the wonder of being a child, but also how traumatic it can be to be a child. And it does the wonderful thing that I love about manga, which is it takes a concept and then it takes it like further than most American comics would, all the way to the logical conclusion of that idea. So this group, it's about a group of childhood friends that when they were younger, they had this whole pretend game where they were a part of a secret society that was taking down a supervillain that called themselves Friend. And then when they grow up, a lot of the things that they imagined in their childhood game have started coming true, including a deadly disease that's spreading across the world that makes people bleed from their eyes and nose until they die. You're like really specific symptoms that have to be from their childhood game. So not only are they fighting against this character, but the evil character that is the supervillain wins. And then they have to remake the world in their absence. Wow. It's like a very cool book. It's really, really, really good. Impossible to adapt. But if you've seen the Pluto anime, that's also Naoki Urasawa. So you can see, like, he's a very, very good character writer. The characters are all really interesting, and you don't really lose sight of what makes the characters, their interpersonal relationship, even as the plot gets more sprawling and crazy.
Yeah. I have not read that many manga. I'm trying to get better about it. I've started seriously reading manga this year. Right now I'm in the middle of Full Metal Alchemist, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and Assassination Classroom, which is
another great book. Those are three classics. Yeah. Their Assassination Classroom is so funny.
I know.
It is a hilarious book. I love the teacher so much.
Yeah, I was not expecting to love that book as much as I did.
I know. I love whenever you get to see a little bit more of his weird alien body. Yeah.
My favorite joke in the entire comic is the fact that they make a lot of hay out of the fact that you can tell what mood he's in based on what color he turns, except the manga is in black and white, so it really doesn't make a difference. And I have no idea how they adapt that into the anime, if they even bother.
The anime is really good also. It's very much a one-to-one adaptation, but the way they animate the fight scenes is really, really good.
Good.
So I would recommend it as well. But yeah, 20th Century Boys, I read it on the internet before it was licensed to in America. And the new omnibus versions are very beautiful. So it's a great translation and a great print. So I highly, highly recommend them. Before this came out, they were in little digest volumes and you had to get like 30 of them. So this is a much easier way to read the entire series. It's great.
All right. We got one last question here, and there's no name, but it is addressed to Gita, and it's just, are you ready?
Yes.
There we go.
52 Pickup is an Aftermath production created by Gita Jackson and Alex Jaffe and edited by Esper Quim with original music by John Ahrens. The views and opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the show's personalities and do not reflect those of DC Entertainment or Warner Brothers. Please rate and review our show wherever you can and send your questions and comments to 52mailbag@gmail.com. Never stop reading comics.